All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for coming on out on a rainy day. Really excited for this session on poverty in the brain. Just want to give a quick introduction to Lindsay Moore. Lindsay is the executive director over at Bridge of Hope Denver. And we have several of our MCs that work closely with Lindsay, and so I think a few of you know her really well, but she's been doing this for a long time. She's been working with people in poverty, speaking and thinking about poverty and mental health, and she's got a wealth of wisdom. And just from my brief meeting with her before, she's got a lot of energy and organization, and I'm really excited for what she has for us today. I got to look through the outline. I think you're going to enjoy it. So let me open us in prayer, and then I'll turn it over to Lindsay. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for the time we have tonight. I thank you for bringing all of these people together. God, I pray that your name would be glorified as we look at ways we can pursue ministry to vulnerable in our communities. And start it with empathy and understanding. God, I pray that you would give Lindsay, just help her to be full of your spirit, that she can say what you would have her to say tonight. That we might walk out of here not just more knowledgeable, but more loving and caring people. And so we're excited for what we're going to hear tonight and how we're going to interact. And so we give it over to you. For us in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Yeah, I'm supposed to wear this. Okay. Hey there. As Mark said, I'm Lindsay, and I am usually very energetic, but I had strep throat this past weekend, and so I'm just kind of beat. Is anybody tired today? Okay, good. We're all being tired. Let's just take a nap. Shut things down and take a little rest. But thanks for having me here. I really like talking about the brain. I like talking about poverty. Yeah, so thanks for having me. A couple of things. I just like to go over what we're going to talk about. And so we're going to talk a little bit about mental health in the Bible just briefly, because I know that's the larger focus. So just to ground us in why this is relevant as a community of faith. We're talking about data on poverty and homelessness. I have a quiz. It's an actual quiz I'm going to hand out to you, but only you will know how well you do. The brain in crisis. We're going to talk about life in poverty, talk a little bit about Bridge of Hope, and how Bridge of Hope integrates our knowledge of how the brain operates in poverty into the way that we do the work that we do. Final Q&A, and then wrap up. Questions? So I am super comfortable with you all asking questions while I do this. Raise your hand, speak out, just ask me. I am not a neuroscientist. Is anyone here a neuroscientist? That makes me feel better. Great. I just know a bit about neuroscience because it affects the work that I do. Just to give you a little bit more information, my boss at my former job, and I used to work at a social science research institute, was really interested in neuroscience and leadership. There's a lot of information out there about that stuff. And so I learned a lot from her, and I used that and integrated it into the work that I was doing. And then that really translated it into understanding how the brain functions under the circumstances of poverty. So that's where my interest started. So ask questions, raise your hand. If I can answer it, I'll answer it. If I don't know, I'll get the information if I can and follow up with you. So I'm pretty comfortable saying I don't know. Step out if you need to talk on your phone. Silence your phones, and we're going to end on time because that is just super important to me. I spent about 4.5 years in Africa, and we never started and ended on time, and I'm still dealing with that. It was a long time ago. Do I have permission from you all to keep things on track? Okay, so sometimes, we'll get down a rabbit hole, and I want to get us through everything. I want us to finish at 8, and so I may say, no more questions, or stop talking, or just crack that whip. So thank you for giving me that permission. Side conversations, that typically throws me off. And so if you could limit the side conversations, I really appreciate that because I'll focus in on you. I'll have to give you the stink eye. It's awkward. We don't want to go there. Okay? Great. Are you all ready? Okay, awesome. So mental health in the Bible, this is y'all's thing. So tell me how you think the two intersect. Yes.
So I think that God cares about our whole
Yes.
person, and that includes our mind.
Great.
So other parts of us as well, but he cares about mind.
Yes, okay, so great. So God cares about a whole person, cares about our minds are part of that. Great. What's your name?
Valerie.
Valerie, I really like that. Awesome. Well said. What else?
I would say that I agree. I would say that there's a perception that faith communities don't necessarily always get on board with mental health trends.
Okay. All right. So that's great. Really, that's great. Thanks, Eric. Awesome. What else?
I would say he totally mirrors it in the whole Trinity. Like,
Say more about that.
well, he has the example of the Trinity, which is Father, Son, and the Spirit, which is a whole person, where we're physical, we're flesh, we're spirit, we're personality. So he already put the example out there for others to follow.
Of wholeness.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
There are things that we're not going to understand, but we can know that God does. And follow him as he interacts with people in their lives. So we're jumping in with people oftentimes, but we're not going to understand everything that's happening. But knowing that, coming alongside them as God does. You know, we talk about him as the Spirit who is that term. He comes alongside, and so we mirror God in that. When they're troubled people.
People that are dealing with mental health challenges. Okay, great. I saw you were Amanda.
So yeah, I was gonna say it's another area where we can be broken. That as a result of sin entering the world,
Okay.
our minds fall into that as well.
That's good. Lori?
I was thinking about in Matthew 25 when he talks about when you do it to the least of these, you do it unto me, and I feel like mental health, people struggling with mental health issues often are marginalized on the edge of society, not accepted, and obviously God wants us to be very much involved in their life.
You guys are good. I'm just going to ask questions. You all do the talking. No, that's really great. Awesome answers. Awesome. So I care about mental health in the Bible because I know God cares a lot about poverty. And I know that's why you all are talking about poverty in the brain tonight. And as someone that works with people that are struggling with poverty, and we know that God cares about poverty, addressing the issue of poverty involves understanding the entirety of the circumstances that are facing a person struggling with poverty, and mental health comes into that. Mental health can affect poverty, it can be affected by poverty. So it affects and is affected by. And so that's why I care about the brain and poverty and mental health. Other thoughts? Yeah, go for it.
Well, the topic is mental health in the Bible. I was just trying to think what Bible verses actually speak to this topic.
Yeah.
The only one that comes to my mind right now is God will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. So I would think those of us who are believers have a little bit of an inside track on good mental health. We've got that promise.
Stay focused on the Lord. Well, I think what's really interesting for me when I better understand mental health and better understand how the brain works, we're better able to tailor our services to work directly with people that are struggling in poverty. And so the Bible doesn't have a lot of verses directly talking about mental health, but the understanding that we have allows me and other social service agencies and you all to better serve people that are struggling in poverty. So to do that work as effectively as possible. Yeah?
Well, I've been living with the index for a couple of months because I moved away 2 years ago from Colorado to Wisconsin, and then coming back, I had to leave a lot of things behind. And didn't really have the money to keep a roof over my head, and they have blessed me with a home. And I also just got diagnosed bipolar. So I know what this is like. And finally having an answer is wonderful, but it's accepting that and knowing that's what we're dealing with and this is where we're going.
And how do you move forward with that?
Pardon me?
No, and how do you move forward with that?
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Awesome. Okay. So I think we're on the same page that there is some intersection there, especially when we're talking about poverty and then thinking about the brain's role in that. So we're going to start with a quiz. I will not see the answers, but it's a great way. We're going to think, does someone want to help me pass out? Oops, Mark's going to come over here. You can just do the answers on your own, but it's a good way for us to talk about some data, to just ground our, to just ground our discussion in the fact, better understanding kind of some of the numbers and data around poverty. I will tell you there isn't a lot of Littleton specific data, and you guys are in Arapahoe County, which is kind of weird. But I will tell you, you're not alone. There are a lot of counties that are weird or very large or strangely laid out in Colorado. So it's hard to really isolate data about Littleton because Arapahoe County is also Aurora, but Aurora is also in Adams County. And Aurora and Littleton are really different. So we'll share as much local data as we have, but go ahead and I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to do that quiz. Okay, who thinks they did really well? Okay, Julie, I like your bag, Julie.
Thank you.
Julie is confident. She's feeling confident. Pride cometh before the fall, Julie. Pride cometh before the fall. Who thinks they did terribly? Okay, the humble ones here. Probably did better than you think. Okay, so let's go through this and talk about it. In Colorado, how many people are living below the poverty line? Who said 360,000? Okay, you would be wrong. Who said 420,000? Okay, that's wrong too. Who said 560,000? Okay, you're right. Oh, look at you. That was right. Good job. Did you say 730 is also, okay, sorry, that is also incorrect. So the exact number is 564,000, which is about 10.3% of the population in Colorado. Okay, so when we say poverty line though, question 2 then helps us think about, well, what are we actually talking about? What is the poverty line? So, question 2, what is the poverty line for a family of 4 in Littleton? Guesses? 40,000. Okay, lower.
35,000.
20. Okay, you have $25,750. Now, who can tell me about the poverty line? How do they figure it out?
Cost of living with what you make.
Okay, cost of living with what you make. That's a good guess, but that's not correct.
Is it national?
It's national. That's okay. So that's a really good point. So it's national. So the Littleton part is a little bit of a trick question there. So it's national. So the federal poverty line is the same everywhere. So New York City, rural Iowa, same poverty line. It is different in Alaska and Hawaii, where it is a little bit higher. You were going to guess back there how the poverty line is calculated, but you're chewing. I so apologize.
Okay.
Anyone else?
So this is based on the federal poverty line, not the state poverty line.
There is no state poverty line.
Then why is California different than Colorado?
It would not be. Now, there are different tools out there that would take into calculation maybe the cost of living, but the poverty line, there's one poverty line, it's the same for everywhere. Are you familiar with another tool?
So I just know that we have friends that lived in California,
Mhm.
and a family in poverty in California is 56,000.
Wow.
And then in Colorado and Arizona, it's different.
So California's a really like liberal, progressive state.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that they haven't adopted the federal poverty line.
Or did they just adapt it to
Right.
factor in
Maybe it's like the minimum wage, where there's a baseline minimum wage and states can elect to have a higher minimum wage. Mm-hmm.
So what I was thinking about would correlate is that you may make more money in one place, but housing is so much higher, so you still can't get there.
Exactly.
You know, so I've been through that the last couple of years of, going down to a $500, 500 square foot apartment in order to, have a roof over.
If only we could all find that right now.
Yeah.
Because that's-
And I'm looking and they're not out there.
Right, they absolutely are not. So the poverty line, which was calculated decades ago, they came up with this method, and there are more modern methods, but this is still kind of the widely accepted federal poverty line. So it's the amount of food that one would consume, so in a family of 4, that 4 individuals would consume in a month, and then they multiply that by 3. Or in a year, and then they multiply that by 3. That's how they come up with it. Doesn't make a lot of sense, doesn't feel relevant, but I'm not joking. I'm really not. And it is the same in New York City. So if you make $26,000 a year for a family of 4 in New York City, the federal government would not consider you to be in poverty. Family of 4 in Denver, $26,000. It's interesting, so Bridge of Hope, we're autonomous, but we have a national office, and there are about 20 Bridge of Hopes around the United States. And we are the Bridge of Hope that we're the winners for the most expensive housing. And so Bridge of Hopes in rural Pennsylvania or rural Iowa, and most of them are in more rural communities, smaller towns. The obstacles that their families are facing to become self-sufficient are just super different because they can find an apartment that will house that house their whole family for $500 a month or $400 a month. And you can make $30,000 a year and pay that. But it's obviously different here in Denver. Okay, true or false? In Colorado, for every 100 renter households with very low incomes, there are 60 affordable and available apartment units. Who thought it was true? Bless you, Lori. Who thought it was true? False? Okay, it was false. So why did you think it was false? Lindsay, do you want to tell us? Sorry, why you thought it was false?
Yeah, let me just read it again.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I think there's a lot less than 60 affordable
Okay, you're right.
units.
46. And this is for every 100 renter households with very low incomes. And I would say even if you have a low income, affording housing here would be challenging. But we're talking very low income. There's 46 units available. So we clearly have a shortage of affordable housing. Okay, 4. In 2018, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development counted how many homeless families, how many individuals and families with children, homeless individuals and families with children in Colorado. Who guessed the last one? 3,800. Okay, so it's actually 3,250. But the issue with this, so the way that they do this survey, so this is called the point-in-time survey. So I don't like this data, but it's kind of the, you have to work with what you've got. I'm not crazy about this data point because do we typically see homeless families on the street? Not often. We typically see single men or women on the street. And so any ideas on where homeless families are sleeping?
Cars.
Cars? Absolutely, Lori. Where else? Shelters. Okay, shelters. Maybe there's some specific shelters. Also, we see something called doubling up. So they're hopping from apartment to apartment, living with folks, sleeping on the floor of an apartment because they can't afford their own. So these folks, now people in a shelter might get counted, but the folks in their car, the folks that are doubling up, we also see people living in hotel rooms. And they get in a cycle where they can't save up enough for the deposit of a hotel. And so they're stuck in their hotel room. They're not getting counted either. So often, so I think the numbers that we see for families aren't really representative of the number of homeless families that are out there. Okay, in Colorado, families headed by single mothers are more than how many times likely to live in poverty than families headed by single fathers? Any guesses? Just call out an answer.
40?
40 times more likely, no, but that would be really depressing. 10? 2.4%. So of the families that are facing homelessness, and this is kind of a national number, of the families that are facing homelessness, 80% are led by single moms. So by far and away, the vast majority are led by single moms. And then we see here that single moms leading families are more than 2.4 times likely to be in poverty than single dads leading families. Any guesses on why that is?
Pay gap?
Pay gap. Okay, so that's a big reason. Absolutely, Mark. The pay gap. Okay. Questions so far? Yeah.
For number 3, is there any data on what's driving that?
What do you mean?
Like, I mean, I know we've got like supply and demand issues here.
Mm-hmm.
So is that purely where this number comes from? Like supply and demand? Like there's just other people with more income, houses or you know, rent is too expensive. So they're gathering it all up, or lack of building these kind of like low income housing units? Like what is
I think all of those things. So I can speak specifically, and I don't want to, I'm sorry, getting off track of the whole brain piece here. Do you all find this interesting at least? Okay, great. So, for example, in Douglas County, finding housing for someone that has an eviction or anything on their record in Douglas County is just impossible. And there are a couple of reasons. They're very limited affordable housing. The housing that is available is, you know, for a 2-bedroom apartment, even a 1-bedroom, you're looking at like $1,600 a month, but there's a really fancy pool and there are granite countertops and, you know, all the amenities that our moms totally don't need. But I think the biggest challenge, so Douglas County, you have tons of housing developments, and those housing developments aren't owned by a specific person. They usually have a group of investors that are from other countries. And so we are able to find a lot of our families housing if they have something in their record, if they have evictions, by building relationships with the landlord. Maybe they'll make an exception. But when you go to a big housing complex in Douglas County and talk to the property manager, they have no flexibility. They have no leeway. Doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter how much they like you or trust Bridge of Hope. They are responsible for reporting to their boss, who reports to those investors. And so it's just not there. There is housing. You could find an apartment, but it's just not out there. I think that's changing. I mean, there are efforts to build more affordable housing, like it is happening, but there are just more people in need than there is housing available. Okay, in the 2015-16 school year, how many students were identified to be experiencing homelessness in Colorado? Any guesses? It was actually 23,954. That was more than double the number from the 2007-2008 school year.
Is that because of the housing industry?
Yeah, I would say all of, right, cost of living increase, lack of affordable housing, absolutely. Okay, true or false? Compared to children who are housed, children who are homeless have 2 times the rate of learning disabilities, 3 times the rate of emotional behavior disorders, 4 times the rate of respiratory infections, 2 times the rate of asthma.
True.
It is true. They are also 2.5 times more likely to be chronically absent as well. Okay, matching column A with column B. I can just give you the percentages. So Colorado is the 41.7%. Douglas is 12. Arapahoe is 43.2. And then Jeffco is 31.3. And so that high Arapahoe County number reflects more of what's happening in Aurora than what's happening in Littleton. Not that there isn't homelessness and poverty here, but it's more of an issue in Aurora. Okay, an emergency shelter for a family costs an average of how much each month? $4,800. Yeah, so Bridge of Hope is a really expensive program, but then so this is actually, I would be happy to send you this study. It's super interesting. It's called a Family Options Study. It was done by the department, the U.S. government, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they worked in cities and shelters all over the United States and came up with this average cost. The average homeless person is also likely to visit the emergency room 5 times a year, with the average cost of each visit being $3,500. And so homelessness is really expensive. Providing these emergency services is really expensive. Being homeless is really expensive. Who did well? Okay, oh, all right. Jess, okay, over there. Great. Were some of you humbled? That's okay. Okay, questions? Yes?
Who pays that $4,800 a month?
Yeah, so there, I mean, government funding for shelters, grantors, individual donors. Bridge of Hope does not cost $4,800 a month for a family, I promise. But there's just a lot of intensive services there when a family is in an emergency shelter, and that's expensive.
So it's the federal government?
No, not just the government. I think a nonprofit that runs a shelter would probably have some government grants, but they'd probably get their money from donors, foundations, where they apply for funding. So probably a whole host of sources. Good question. All right, so let's move on to talk about the brain. Yay. Okay, so I kept trying to remember, what was the name of the awesome person that did the last presentation?
Carolyn Dunn.
Carolyn. Great. So I won't just say the lady, Carolyn. Great. Carolyn gave a lot of information on the brain, and I'm not going to talk as much as she did about it. I may be repeating a few of the things that she shared, so apologies if that happens. But a couple of things we just want to lay the foundation. So the brain, the most important part to talk about when we're thinking about poverty and brain is the prefrontal cortex, which is the CEO of the brain. Who knows anything about the prefrontal cortex? Yeah?
Well, it does all of our higher level functions.
Great. Yes. So the CEO, executive function of the brain, absolutely, really important stuff. I'm going to actually read to you a paragraph from some research that just summarizes. Executive functions can be defined as the coordinated operations of various cognitive neural processes and allows to accomplish a current goal flexibly. Planning, judgment, decision-making, anticipation, and reasoning are examples of executive functions. To achieve proper judgment, correct decision-making, or timely action, a top-down control process is needed to control various neural operations in a coordinated and flexible manner. This top-down control process is called executive function. The prefrontal cortex is known to be an important brain area for executive control, since it has been shown that human patients with damage to their prefrontal cortex exhibit poor judgment, planning, and decision-making. The prefrontal cortex, super important for all of those things. Here's kind of a list of key things that the prefrontal cortex does. So awareness of strengths and weaknesses, planning, so short-term planning, long-term planning, which definitely goes into goal setting. Self-initiation, so being able to get motivated, do activities, drive yourself to do those things. Self-monitoring, so regulating your behavior, your emotions. Strategic behavior, doing the right thing at the right time, and then working memory. Memory is so important. Memories of the past to help make decisions for the future. Who thinks all of these things would be really helpful if you're trying to work your way out of poverty? Okay, great. So that's why we're talking about executive function right now. Let me see if there's anything I just want to share from here. Problems with executive function may be manifested when a person, and this was kind of in a school setting, but I thought this list was interesting, has difficulty planning a project, has trouble comprehending how much time a project will take, struggles to tell a story or communicate details in an organized sequential manner, has difficulty with the mental strategies involved in memorization and retrieving information, has trouble initiating activities or tasks, has difficulty retaining information. So that's someone who's struggling, who their executive function is impaired, some of the challenges that they would face. Now I want to talk about fight or flight. And I know that Carolyn definitely talked about this. Remember she talked about the tiger? Has anybody ever experienced that flight or fight? Yes. Do you want to share? Okay, you don't have to. No problem. Anybody else? Yeah, go for it.
I approached a house because I needed, my
son had stuck a bead up his nose.
I've totally been there. I've lived that story.
And we were driving to church when I saw the bead, and I went to a house where a woman was gardening, and she said, I have some tweezers, we'll see if that works. And I walked into her house, and her German Shepherd came running at me.
Wow.
And no one stopped him. And he jumped up on me and nipped me. And I was like freaked out about my son, and then I had this dog running at me, and I had this like, I want to run, but I can't. I just froze.
There is that flight, fright, or freeze.
Yeah.
And what happened? Did she get the dog off?
I had a bruise on my stomach, but I got the tweezers.
Did you get the bead out? I had to go.
No, we had to go to Children's, and
$300 later.
Yes,
the
pretty
bead is out. I had a bead in the bead in the nose, and then a bead in the ear.
Well, the 3 weeks later, when he had a bean up his nose, after being terrified. Yeah, no, he's done both.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so anybody else? And I'll just share a quick example. So I was actually in Ecuador in the Amazon, and I was younger, and so we had this really cheap tour guide that was super fun, and we spent like 3 days like running through the Amazon. But I really have a very, very serious snake phobia. It is not a joke. Like even pictures, I just can't deal. I can't go there. And he knew that I was afraid of snakes, but he forgot, and we took like this boat ride in a canoe, and we get to this village, and I turn around and he comes out with like a giant snake wrapped around him. And I don't even remember thinking, I just remember running, like into a strange village, and I just had that really quick response. And so what happened there is that's my amygdala activating. And so the amygdala takes in with your senses what's going on, and the amygdala's job is it's constantly asking, am I safe? And if the response is no, it instantly overrides that prefrontal cortex and sets into action other parts of your body that respond. So a couple things to just read about the amygdala. I want to make sure I'm sharing all this. They actually can see from neuroimaging that blood drains from the prefrontal cortex during this flight or fight, it actually drains from the brain. So super interesting stuff. And it makes that split-second decision. And then we have all of these physical reactions: dilation of the pupil, dry mouth, fast breathing, heart pounding. It's actually amazing that these things happen. It's amazing that our brains are actually created in a way to respond so quickly that we don't even think about it. Because if we were engaging our prefrontal cortex, and I was thinking, there's a snake, should I run? That's, if there's a tiger coming at you, as Carolyn shared, you'll be dead. And so without even thinking, our body responds so quickly and goes into action. Or we freeze, and then that could also go very poorly for us. So it's quite interesting that this happens. The problem, though, is that very rarely in our day-to-day life, in Colorado, in the Denver area, do we encounter tigers or big snakes wrapped around people, or hopefully not too often German Shepherds jumping on us. But we do deal with a lot of stress. Does anybody like stress, a level of stress? I love a level of stress. I enjoy it. I feel motivated by some stress. It's really bad for me, but I'm a little bit of a junkie for it. Tolerable stress is actually, this is really interesting. We're going to touch on this a little bit more later, but the difference between tolerable and toxic stress is that someone experiencing tolerable stress is someone that has stress that's buffered by supportive relationships. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But something about chronic stress, and this is from the American Psychological Association. Chronic stress is a long-term form of stress derived from unending feelings of despair or hopelessness as a result of factors such as poverty, family dysfunction, feelings of helplessness, and or traumatic early childhood experiences. The prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that is most vulnerable to the detrimental effects of stress. Under chronic stress, the prefrontal cortex shuts down chronically and fails to develop properly. And so our body can go into a mode where we're operating like we're being chased by tigers, even though that we're not. There are other stressful things in our lives. And so our prefrontal cortex is shutting down, and we're operating in that amygdala-driven flight or fight mode. They can actually, this is super depressing. You see right up here the prefrontal cortex up at the top. And so this is optimal, this is stressed. Advanced brain imaging shows the impact of traumatic and acute stress on the brain. The functional holes seen in the prefrontal cortex represent areas of severe brain dysfunction. And so this is the impact that acute stress can have on your brain. And then poverty in a child's brain. And I promise to stop looking at my Chromebook so much. But I feel like this brain stuff is, I just want to make sure I'm getting the words right and giving you all of that good information. I think one thing when we think about poverty, it's not poverty itself, it's the conditions created by poverty that cause issues. Yes?
Before you go into that, I guess I'm just wondering about the stress and brain, as far as what's the difference between people that live paycheck to paycheck, which is probably the majority of us, you know, and people that are, you know what I'm saying, an actual, what we call the toxic poverty.
Okay, what do you think the difference might be? You know, we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
But think of, like, bring that up if you don't feel we go into that again, but that's a great question. Two recent influential reports cracked open a public conversation on this matter. In one report, researchers found that impoverished children had less gray matter. So this gray matter, as we saw it, that's good. The holes are not good. Less gray matter, brain tissue that supports information processing and executive behavior. Working together, these brain areas are crucial for following instructions, paying attention, and overall learning. Some of the keys to academic success. A quarter of the participants came from homes well below the federal poverty level. Children from the poorest backgrounds showed greater diminishment of gray matter and scored lower on standardized tests. And I'm just going to actually jump to some data that I have to share later, but I'm just going to share it now. Something that's really, so research has determined that the mental strain placed on a poor person is immense, affecting their ability to do well in school, to succeed at work, even pay bills. They equate this strain to roughly a 13-point drop in IQ. The limited brain power caused by poverty. So our brain has a certain bandwidth, and all that goes into being in poverty takes up quite a bit of that brain bandwidth. And so there isn't more to deal with other issues, and your prefrontal cortex isn't engaging anyways. But we'll circle around to a lot of this. Okay, so we're gonna take some time, and we're gonna actually talk about mental models of poverty and middle class. Does anybody know what a mental model is? I am terrible at explaining this, so I just wrote it up here, and I'm gonna talk us through what it looks like. A mental model is an explanation of someone's thought process about how something works in the real world. It is a representation of the surrounding world, the relationships between its various parts, and a person's intuitive perception about his or her own acts and their consequences. That still feels a little confusing to me. So look, we're going to do one together here. And then I'm going to have you all do one. And so the one that we're going to do together, I will just put it up here. I know some of you can't see super well, but let's think about what a mental model for middle class looks like. So I'm going to draw a circle, and you all are going to do this at your table. You're going to draw a circle. I'm going to write middle class up here. And so let's think about someone that's in middle class. So what are some things that are in their day-to-day life?
A car.
Car, so transportation with a car. Okay, so car, that's great. Okay, food. Oh, tell me more about food. What would
The ability to go buy what you want.
So you're going grocery shopping, you're getting the food you need, you're buying what you want. That was a great point. What about, I might even add restaurants. How many people eat at restaurants? Okay, so restaurants, we'll put that in there. What else?
Job.
Job, okay. What kind of jobs are we talking about here typically?
White collar jobs.
Okay, white collar jobs.
Jobs that require a degree.
Jobs that require a degree. That's a really good point.
Some type of extra training.
Okay, extra training, absolutely. Great. So you can command a higher salary and be middle class. What else?
Medical benefits.
Medical benefits. Okay, so doctors. And I think with medical benefits in middle class, you also have you have a doctor that you're seeing regularly. You're going to the dentist regularly. So you have benefits, and I would say you're probably also regularly accessing care when you need it. Okay, what else? Yeah?
Access to a typical banking system.
Banking, okay, banking, that's great. Okay, a banking institution that you trust, you have confidence in.
They're connected to their community,
Okay, and what does that look like?
relationships or networks.
Okay, networks and relationships.
Maybe resources.
And those are different. Networks are different. I mean, they're the same, but they're different. Relationships. What kind of resources?
Neighbors, HOA,
Okay,
church.
great. Okay, HOA, neighbors.
Access to credit and loans and things like that.
Okay, that's great. And what kind of credit and loans?
Low interest.
Okay, great. That's important. Okay, I'm a really bad speller. Okay. All right, what else?
Adequate, comfortable
Hmm?
clothing.
Clothing? Okay, clothing. What kind of clothing?
Adequate, comfortable, appropriate.
Clothing. So clothing you like, that's appropriate. Good. Recreation. What does recreation look like in middle class?
Museums, sporting events, sport.
Museums, sports,
Vacations.
vacations.
Media entertainment.
What was that?
Media entertainment.
Media. Okay.
Safety,
Safety. Okay, what about safety?
just like housing, like you can pretty much guarantee if you're middle class, you have safe housing.
Okay, so you feel safe.
Right.
Got it. Okay, sense of safety. Good.
Routine.
Routine. That's really good. Who's that routine? That's good. I hadn't heard that before, but you're absolutely right. We are creatures. I love routine for the
What
most
about
part.
perception?
Excuse me?
Perception, like this is all perception of safety, and it's all how the world perceives middle class, where it may not be true. Like middle class, you can be quite stressed, just trying to keep it all together. So your perception is that it's good, but is it really good? Like, are you living in debt, or are you actually living paycheck to paycheck? Or I mean, the middle class is dying.
Very true. These are all great points. So there would be some stress. So I think that's fair to say, some stress.
Yeah.
Maybe some like pressure to keep up with. Yeah.
I hate that. I really do. I mean, I live by like, I don't have that in my life, but like that, I really hate that. We just moved a block, and so my daughter has to switch to a new school. She doesn't have to, but it's a really good elementary school in Denver. And I found out we're living on the wrong side of the tracks, and that's excellent. Perfect. We are not going to keep up with the Joneses. What else?
How about just some extra things, like you have a pet, your
Yeah.
kid
Oh,
plays sports, stuff like that.
Extra. That's a good one. Extra stuff. Something extra. So pet, sports. Okay.
You have respect, like in the community.
That's good.
You command respect.
Community respect. Okay.
Comfort.
Comfort.
More friends.
Boyfriends. More friends. I don't know what you're doing. All right. comfort, more friends. Well, and you know, okay. What do you think? And you don't have to know the answer. I'm not going to tell you the answer to this. What do you think is is one of the fundamental values of middle class? If you had to put kind of one value at the center.
Autonomy.
Autonomy. That's a good one. Family. Autonomy. Family. Money. Okay. Anything else? Any security.
Home ownership.
Home. Okay, home. And so that's actually one that I feel like would even go out here. Is you have a home and you might own it. Happiness.
Conformance.
Conforming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Conformity. Gosh, these are like all the things I hate about them. Okay, great. This is good with this. Do you guys get what I'm talking about when we say the mental model of middle class? Okay, so I'm going to pass out sheets, and I want you to make a mental model of life in poverty. Okay? Questions? You just have pens at your table, but that'll work. And then when you're done, I want you to paste it on the wall so we can all see it. Okay? I think it'll be interesting to see what other people have come up with. So just to give you a little information on where this comes from. So Bridges Out of Poverty. Is anybody familiar with Bridges Out of Poverty? It's just a way of understanding the different socioeconomic classes. And this isn't used to stereotype, but to better understand so that services can more effectively meet folks where they're at. So just to share a little bit of that. So what are some of the similarities that you notice, kind of the commonalities amongst the majority of them?
There's more of a focus on basic needs.
Basic needs.
Like shelter, food,
okay.
Clothing.
Shelter, food, clothing. Okay, meeting those basic needs. Great. What else? Yeah.
A lot of people put survival as a core value in the middle.
Okay. Survival is that core value.
Ability to take care of your children if they're homesick, or what do you do? You know.
Yes. That is right. You may not. So the job you have, if you don't have a lot of skills, kind of that additional education and training, if you need to miss a day, they may be a little bit less empathetic. You don't have, or maybe you don't even have sick days.
A lot of people put just the social stigma of poverty, kind of just around the outside, how it kind of puts them at a disadvantage from being pushed to the outside, or not being noticed, or lack of voice, or things like that.
Okay, marginalized. Okay, overlooked. Great.
I don't know if this is like too meta, but I noticed like the lack of, or I guess the lens in which we are writing these things. Like everybody's putting like lack of or like zero, and I would wonder what it would look like if an actual person in poverty was writing this. Like, would that thought even cross their mind? Like, lack of, like, I don't even know what that is. It's not an issue for me.
That's a really good question.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
I grew up in poverty.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
You write it, because that's what you feel.
You do feel that awareness.
Puts on you. And yeah, I grew up as a single mom in poverty, where she was looking up at the poverty line. It was very, very desperate, and you really do feel it. And when you go to school and you see all your friends, and you're having to like hide the shame and the hiding that you do, it's real as a kid. So yeah, no, I agree with the lens, because when we were writing stuff down, I even said half the stuff could be in middle class, like the drugs, but it's easier when you're pigeonholing it to write it.
You're right. Half of these things, you know, people were talking about the stress of middle class, or kind of borderline middle class poverty. I mean, absolutely. I don't think any more people in poverty do drugs than in middle class or in wealth. So, absolutely. But it feels like you can mask it and you have the resources and maybe the type of drugs you're using, you know, so more socially acceptable, fewer consequences. Like you think about in the judicial system, like minimum mandatories with crack cocaine or crack versus cocaine. Crack is your poor man's drug, and the minimum mandatory sentences with crack are way higher than the minimum mandatory with cocaine. So you even think about kind of the educational, what just happened with people of wealth bribing their way or bribing universities for their kids to get into school. And I read this article and it talked about people of color that had gotten their kids into elementary schools that they weren't officially district in for, and the jail time that these individuals did. So, right, what are those consequences? And can you afford lawyers? OJ did it, but he had a really great legal team. So, thinking about that, okay? And so this is not, I think one of the things, and I have another tool if we have time we can look at, the thing people don't like about Ruby Payne and Bridges Out of Poverty is that people say, which is not Bridge of Hope, just very separate, a lot of bridges and hopes out there, that they feel like this is stereotyping and this is not fair. And so that is an issue that a lot of people take with this. But I feel like this exercise can be useful as we think about what life in poverty is like, and then we tie that to how that can impact someone's brain. And so that's the reason for this exercise. It's not to pigeonhole anyone. Okay, so what are some other commonalities that we're seeing? I think transportation came up as one, which is so huge. Does anyone rely on the bus system here in Denver? Bus system, it is really not reliable. And it takes forever. I've lived in cities that have good public transportation, and Denver is questionable. And if you're really trying to get around, it's not easy peasy. And so the amount of time you can spend waiting for a bus, catching a bus, getting to an appointment, being there on time, it is really all consuming. And then honestly, even if you do get a car, insurance is so stinking expensive. So transportation can be a huge factor that just takes up time in a person's that's struggling day. Another thing that I see, so kind of transportation I feel like is just a theme that I see as a challenge. Another thing, so then who are the people that are driving broken down cars? And those cars are the ones that need the most work. So you have a car that's not worth a lot and you're spending a ton of money constantly repairing the car. It's like this cycle. It's really the pits. Other things that came up, kind of common things.
Difficulty with higher education.
Higher education, okay. Why do you think that is? Say more about that.
Well, the standard is a lot, at least like my interaction with kids going through schools that are in poorer areas. The standard of education is a lot lower, just even from the point of starting in elementary school. And so that by the time they graduate high school, their test scores are going to be a lot lower. And so there's like that side of academically, they're at an academic disadvantage, and then there's also the financial disadvantage.
That's really, so in the Bridges Out of Poverty, there's actually, and I don't have the exact number for you, but it's significant. They took kids that were 5 and under and the number of words that kids who were in poverty were exposed to, like the depth, the breadth of vocabulary, but then also the positive reinforcement versus the negative was so different for kids in poverty as opposed to kids in families that were middle class or people of wealth. Yeah, but you've got to empathize with that, because think about it. If you're so stressed out getting food, finding shelter, riding the bus everywhere, you know, do you have time to, you know, your kid's climbing on a stool and it's not like, little Jamie, have you thought about the consequence of, you know, which when you have bandwidth, you can do. When you don't have that bandwidth, it's like, get off the stool. You don't have time. You are so maxed out and thinking about feeding everyone. You don't have time to use big words and kind of use that positive reinforcement. Yeah, get off, right? So That's definitely something. Okay, great. So I think a difference in relationship with school. So in schools that are less supported, have fewer resources, as opposed to somewhere in the school where they have fundraisers and there's a PTO where parents are super engaged. Do parents not want to be engaged in poverty? I would think that maybe parents are working too many jobs to have the time to be engaged in the PTO in communities where there's poverty. Yes?
I think a lot of times without a computer,
Mm.
they have all these government programs, but they can't fill out any paperwork because they don't have a laptop. They don't have an advocate that can help them, because every single system has a different set of forms you have to fill out, and it's exhausting, and
It is so
I can see
awful.
giving up.
Yes, and I will say that we see, so childcare, I saw that up here. Childcare is such a huge barrier for folks. We have summer coming up. So your kid may be in school, but what are you gonna do in the summer? What if you wanna keep your job? Where are your kids gonna go? So getting those benefits and keeping them is such a battle. We see moms' food stamps turned off. We don't know why. And the legwork they have to go through to get them turned back on. Missing work, the endless amount of paperwork. You should see the packet of paper that has to be completed to get food stamps. It's definitely not simple. The paper trail is there, the bureaucracy. Some counties make it easier than others. I've heard the Littleton area, Arapahoe is really nice. Douglas County is a bear to deal with. So lots of challenges, absolutely. And so you're spending a lot of time riding the bus to get to all these social service agencies, which keep 9 to 5 hours. So that's really, that's a little bit of a pet peeve for me. You want to go to a food bank, like 90% of them are open like in the middle of the workday. So, okay. So interesting, you all came up with a lot of the same things. Unreliable transportation. I saw the medical piece come up. People said lack of safety, lack of security, uncertainty, sad and depressed. There are plenty of people that are depressed in middle class. I mean, we know that, we see the data, but dealing with poverty is no picnic. So, okay, so I'm gonna show you what, I don't even know where my clicker is. I think I lost the clicker, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is
on the table next to the screen.
Okay, so mental model of poverty, and so this is what Ruby Payne from Bridges Out of Poverty came up with. So you see childcare, food, criminal justice system, housing. These are all the things that kind of take up the life of someone who's struggling. I thought it was really interesting when someone over here mentioned credit, low interest credit. And then I saw in a few of these, people mentioned those agencies that take advantage of folks that are in poverty. And yeah, you can get cash, but you're paying incredibly high interest rate. And so the services that are out there are the stores. I saw food deserts. So I saw malnutrition. There's actually a lot of information that supports obesity is more of an issue in places of poverty, because the only place you can go for food and you don't have a car, so you can't drive the distance, is like the local gas station. So you're buying like crappy high processed foods that aren't good for you, have a lot of carbs and sugar and whatnot. Now, at the center of this, she put relationships. Any thoughts on why that's there? You can agree or disagree. This isn't the Bible, it's just someone's research and work. But thoughts? Yes, Dave.
Well, basically what you are doing with Bridge of Hope is you're inserting relationship and help into all of these kinds of things we set out to be difficult. You're trying to make it less difficult. Without that relationship with you and the neighborhood, what we call our neighbors, we're inserting relationships where if it's not there, they're on their own. Does that make sense?
Yes, it is, and this is not mine. So this is another entity came up with this. I really like that, but that is not why she put it in there. She put it in there without the thought of Bridge of Hope at all.
I think middle class, we can tend to be a lot more self-sufficient because we can.
And so what is that? Why is relationships here then?
Because they have to, for survival.
You are absolutely right. That is exactly why Ruby Payne put relationships here. And so it really, when you all put survival in there and security, that absolutely ties in. So think about the example that I've heard. If you are middle class and you're driving your car around and it breaks down on the road, who do you call?
AAA.
AAA. You have AAA. You call AAA, they come out, they tow your car, done. Do you think people in poverty have AAA? If their car breaks down, who do they call? A friend to come and fix, absolutely. And so those relationships are so crucial to survival. Those relationships, you're not sending your kid to a high quality child care institution. You know, there's no fancy summer camp. It's the neighbor down the street, that relationship that's gonna watch your kids in the summer so you can work. Absolutely, so the relationships are absolutely central. So now that you know that relationships are central for poverty, the mental model, what do you think Ruby Payne put as the center for middle class? Independence. Achievement. You can achieve a vacation.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with anybody? This really lands with me because I come from a very achievement-oriented family that just loves achieving and finds a lot of self-worth. My dad is, who does not know Jesus, is all about achieving. Achieve, achieve, achieve. And that's how someone gets their value. And so when I saw this, that really landed with me quite a bit. Super interesting stuff. Not that relationships don't matter, just in middle class, there's just a very high value placed on achievement. And then of course, there's the time for hobbies and clubs and civics groups. Transportation is still an issue, but you have a car. You can afford to have it fixed, so very different. Children's activities, political action, mental health. Chemical dependency is still there, but like we talked about, probably looks a little different. Retirement. So thinking about retirement, saving for retirement. Careers, it's not just a job, you have a career. You do have debt, someone mentioned that. Credit card debt. Shopping, hobbies and sports. Okay. And then I also put in the mental model for wealth. Now, with these mental models, we're not talking about a doctor. We're talking about someone that has a significant amount of wealth. We're talking about like the Carnegies or the Vanderbilts, like significant generational wealth. Any idea what would be in the center of wealth?
Happiness.
Happiness, okay. No.
Money.
What?
Money.
Money, okay.
Influence.
Influence, okay. Power. Legacy. These are all very interesting. Greed, okay. With the 80s, greed is good.
Comfort.
Comfort. Okay. So they actually have connections. And so the reasons that connections came up is because you can lose your money, but if you have the right connections, you can make it back again. And I thought that was really interesting. And then you see here, travel, vacation, keeping up, board of directors, private clubs, charitable activities, media and political linkages. So different. So, when you think about what we did, the mental model with poverty, what do you think living in that environment is like? And yes, we talked about stress in middle class or even when you're on the line, but on a day-to-day basis.
A constant low-key feeling of panic.
Constant feeling of panic. Okay.
Where's my next meal?
Where's my next meal?
Where are my children going to get a meal?
Am I getting to eat or just my kids get to eat tonight? Uh-huh.
I knew a guy who described it in terms of adventure and quest, but not with the positive way we think of it, like from watching a movie or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in direct opposition to the thought of the routines that we find so much comfort.
Does he have children?
No.
Right. So it might feel a little more, you know, I'm living outside. I'm living outside the cultural norm. I don't have a routine. There's adventure in that.
It wasn't a bit, so I should say that again, like, he used that terminology, but not in a positive sense,
Okay.
like an enjoyable adventure. It's like I'm always on a quest to figure out what I'm supposed to be. Like,
So there's no rest.
yeah.
Constant quest to meet your basic needs.
Yes.
Okay?
Fear.
Fear? Yeah?
A continual crisis aversion.
Oh, crisis aversion. That's good. I see that for sure.
Are there
One crisis to the
statistics
next.
for suicide with these 3 models?
I have no idea. That's a great question. Although I will tell you, Douglas County has one of the highest suicide rates in Colorado, and that's a county of wealth. So I don't know.
I think if there's high achievement expectation, there'll be higher suicide
Interesting.
rate.
It's a very, she said if there's higher expectation around achievement, speaking to middle class, then there'd be higher suicide rates potentially. And we're just speculating, but that's an interesting thought. Okay? So we agree, or the consensus seems to be that the poverty is exhausting, and so it actually creates something that we call tyranny of the moment, which is the continuous urgent needs of living in an unstable environment rob an individual of the capacity for future thinking. So the reason we did this mental model, after we talked about the brain under chronic stress, is because I want us to think about the fact that science, neuroimaging, we can actually see how the brain operates under chronic stress. The prefrontal cortex is not being engaged. And so you've got that mental piece, the brain, the prefrontal cortex that helps us think in the long term, make decisions, make good choices, is not operating. And you're dealing with the constant daily crisis of survival. The constant day-to-day, riding the bus, getting food, where am I sleeping?
So I just want to clarify, are you saying they have taken those images of the brain of people that are living in poverty and they showed that stress?
Yes.
Or are they just generally someone under stress?
So they've done a whole host of other things, but they find that people that are in chronic stress, which is very often associated with poverty or extreme poverty, absolutely have more of those holes in their brain. So less gray matter in areas in their prefrontal cortex. The longer you spend not using your prefrontal cortex, the harder it is to re-engage it. Doesn't mean it can't be re-engaged, but it's harder, yes.
Have they done studies comparing the mindset of poverty in America versus poverty in third world countries where they don't have the same expectations of living?
That's really interesting. So are you speaking to the fact that if you're, when you talked about poverty growing up and feeling some shame at school, because it was relative, like there's a comparison.
Exactly.
I'm here, someone else is here. And in poverty, everyone I lived in an African village, like everyone's poor.
But they're not. But they're poor compared to America.
Mm-hmm.
Like
depends on the definition.
Yeah,
of
the
poverty.
definition of poverty. Have they
No,
done
no.
any studies comparing the definition of poverty?
I will say that I see, so there's another sheet that I can pass out, and I see that poverty creates certain behaviors, or it forces in a way certain behaviors or patterns in people that I observed in African communities that were in poverty that I think you also see in some American communities that are in poverty, just because not having money leads to lack of access to quality medical care, those types of things. But I wonder if there is that stress. People in the African village I lived in were pretty relaxed.
Yeah.
They're basically, you could say, 'cause when we were in Haiti, they're content with what they have. That they're not worried about what they don't have. Even though they see it next door, in the house that's 3 stories high, they're content if they have a meal that they got off doing something in the street. So there's something inside them that they're okay with it, whereas in our culture, I'm not okay with it.
Well, it's no fun to live in poverty. either and be struggling like that. So I think there is that relative piece, and there's also just the challenges and the stress of making it day to day that they make it incredibly stressful here.
I think there's just more layers to survival in a developed country.
That's a really good point. That's a really good way of saying that. Do you want to say more about that? Can everybody?
Because I grew up in a third world country.
Oh, you did? Which one?
Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
And I guess I would say the main difference is that there's a difference between very basic human needs that every human will find stressful if they're not met, which is primarily food and housing. You know, and
safety.
And to some extent medical care and safety. Yeah. But then there's everything else that in a developed country is added on top of that. You know, so for example, education, which is not a factor as far as your self-esteem or your happiness in most third world countries. But here, in order to, you can't just go out and take food from the land. You have to get a job, and you have to be educated to get a good job that can maybe support your family. So, and then there's all the societal expectations of like how you present yourself, how you live your life, the types of lifestyle you have. So it's more complicated, and there's a lot more pressures.
That's really good. Yes, I mean, you think about if you're in a developing country and someone's housing structure, they have very simple furniture. They don't need, but here, you know, it's like, well, I've got the mattress and the mattress cover and the sheets and then the right pillows, and there's just a lot more. You know, think about our cell phone expenses. It is expensive to live in America. There are a lot of expenses that come with just going through life here. And you're right, a lot of layers. It's a really interesting way to think about it. Okay, really good insight and thought. What time is it?
7:30.
Okay. So I can pass out. I've been hesitant. I'm not sure. Like, do I want to share this? But I can. But I really. Some people don't like this, so I want you to tell me if you hate it. Just tell me. I did not make this. This is also from Ruby Payne, and this is called Hidden Rules. So I am always hesitant because some people get really angry. That's fine. I can take it. I'm ready. So this is something called the Hidden Rules. It's from Ruby Payne, and you'll see it up here. And they have one thing to understand, and this very much speaks to generational wealth, generational poverty, and generational middle class. So if you're experiencing an instance of poverty, and it's not something that has, you grew up with, and that your mom grew up with, the values that you have may just be different. So people get mad at this because they say we're stereotyping, and I think that's not an invalid argument. But I'm going to pass this out. I think it's interesting to see and think about what the circumstances of living in poverty, what that kind of creates in terms of values around food and clothing and time and education, as well as values around middle class, or being in middle class and those values, and being in wealth and those values. I'm going to pass this out. I think it's an interesting thing to think about. What I want you to do with it is you can share your frustrations with your table. That'll be good. I'll do that. And I want you to go through this and actually think about which of these apply to you. So my parents, I will share personally, really struggled financially when I was growing up. But they are like true and true middle class achievement. Those values were there 100%. I'll just let you take a look at this. And then there are pens if you want to circle the ones that you feel like land for you. And then take some time and talk about this with your table. Okay? So just to share a little bit about why Ruby Payne created this, the idea behind creating this is to also better understand choices that sometimes folks in circumstances of generational poverty are making and what's behind that, so that services can better support people in those circumstances. I might not have enough. No, I do. I think I do. Does anybody have one extra? Oh, here we go. That's fine. So go ahead and look at this and then talk about it with your table. And I'm going to give you about 5-10 minutes to do that. Okay, we only have 20 minutes left, so we're gonna cut the time talking short. So let me give a little bit more information about hidden rules. So how many people have hidden rules that go with your family? So if someone walked into your family situation, they might not understand all that's going on there. Or there might be something that someone could do that would really offend your family. Everybody should raise their hand. Okay, a lot of hand raising. My friend Lindsay, also, I know other Lindsays as well, not this Lindsay. She actually, they don't interrupt each other, and they all talk slowly and quietly, and they wait for the person to finish. I'm like, this is crazy, but that's the way they do it.
To Eric's family, I didn't realize this, but they all thought I was super loud. Like, not talking, but just in general, loud. And Eric had to teach me, don't close the cabinet so hard. And I'm like, I don't know. But in their family, they're like, Jessica's on a rampage.
Jessica's here, get out of her way. But that's funny because that's unspoken. And so Eric might not have even thought about it until Very Loud You showed up. And you realized there was this unspoken rule about being quiet. Okay, what else? Anybody else have hidden rules?
In my house, we didn't talk about anything that mattered.
Okay.
It was just small talk.
Constant small. Okay, that would be right. So someone that's used to engaging deeply and comes in. Oh gosh, I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen with my in-laws. Yeah, absolutely. Very uncomfortable then. Yeah.
My grandfather was a very dominant man.
Mm-hmm.
So his children, my mother and her siblings, all were very quiet at the dinner table. So I came around my generation. We learned to be silent at the table when Grandpa was there. My husband came for dinner one time, and he asked Grandpa a question. And I was like,
You be quiet. Which is from the outside, it's like, what is?
We don't talk at me.
Oh, so he didn't get that.
It was weird. It was weird. I'm not saying it's good.
And those are hidden rules. So there are these unspoken things that feel incredibly normal. Like, why doesn't everybody know this? But if you're looking in from the outside, they seem very strange. If you're on the inside, they make perfect sense. Of course we don't talk. Grandpa's here. Hello? And yet, to your husband, it's like, this is odd, right? And that's the way it is often with the hidden rules between middle class, poverty, wealth. When I got actually a temp job right after Peace Corps, I flew in and 12 hours later I was interviewing for a temp job. And I go to work and my mom bought me some clothes for work, and I'm a pretty modest person, but I had kind of a low cut shirt and was showing some cleavage. And my aunt's friend worked at this place, that's how I got the job, and she saw me and she was like, what are you doing? You're showing cleavage. And I'm like, I just came from a village. Heck, I'm wearing a shirt. Now I was wearing a shirt. But I was surrounded by people that weren't, by women that weren't wearing shirts. And so I'm like, what? And so that's so basic. In a professional environment, you don't show cleavage. And yet, if someone hadn't, it's like, to eat carrots because from birth, people have been saying, eat your carrots. But we aren't born knowing to eat carrots. And so we don't realize that within these socioeconomic classes, there are all these hidden rules. And so if someone has been in generational poverty, they're trying to get to middle class, they don't know the rules. And that's just something to be aware of. So I shared that just because I really like to travel, that I am super middle class, although I always think about the world internationally, from an international perspective. Did anybody find that they really fit into one category, but not in all of the areas, or any examples to share?
The whole money thing.
Okay.
That you can spend, and when you're middle class, you really think about what you buy. There aren't too many impulse things.
There's that prefrontal cortex helping you think about the long term, but you also know.
Next check.
And there is hope of a next check. Right? Maybe in poverty, it's like, I got it, I'm going to get something. Instant gratification, I'm going to get what I, right.
There's some things like as a, 20-something that just came out of college with a lot of debt, that I grew up with my dad being very strict middle class, but as I've become on my own, I've started actually having more of the poverty thoughts at times, just because of my own struggles that my dad doesn't necessarily understand and doesn't feel like he taught me that way, if that makes sense.
Okay, and I think that one of the things to point out is that I think, so example with food, so did you get enough? And so it's not that someone in poverty might not like a nice presentation, but the circumstances that you're in with just trying to make sure everyone's fed force that attitude in a way. So just something to share. Once again, please don't use this to stereotype people. You don't use it to make assumptions, but I think it can help better understand the circumstances, the situations that poverty creates. So let me tell you just a little bit about Bridge of Hope. I lost that clicker again.
It's right there.
I am just...
I was watching you this time.
Thank you. You should see me try to find my phone. It is a nightmare. My 7-year-old finds my phone for me. Okay, so Bridge of Hope, our mission statement is engaging Christian faith communities and ending homelessness through neighboring relationships that demonstrate Christ's love. And I'm not here to give you an advertisement about Bridge of Hope. I did put some information in my card in the middle of the tables, but it's more to share a little bit about how we're responsive to this information that I just shared with you. And so we're providing housing with rental assistance. We're providing a network of supportive volunteers from a Christian faith community. And we're providing professional support focused on budgeting, career planning, and life skills. And so the housing, very few programs in the Denver area provide in fact, I don't really know any other programs that provide the level of housing assistance that we provide. The reason that we do that is because we recognize that when someone is operating in crisis and that prefrontal cortex is shut down, understandably, because they don't have a place for themselves and their kids to live, how can they possibly think about reaching self-sufficiency? How can they possibly think about getting a promotion? How can they possibly think about going back to school? How can they possibly be good parents? Because they're so stinking stressed out. And so although this is a really expensive part of our program, we find that it is essential to reaching that self-sufficiency part. Absolutely essential. The network of supportive volunteers. That's where we talk about those relationships. Dave, you mentioned when you were looking at that Ruby Payne, that mental model, how relationships can help with so many of those ongoing crises that come up when you're living in poverty, the transportation, the childcare. Sometimes people can provide those resources for someone that's struggling, but sometimes it's also connections, help with the paperwork. I know someone that has a summer camp that your kid can go to. Hey, I can fix cars, can I help you out? That kind of thing. There's actually a lot of research when you look at neuroimaging and whatnot that supportive relationships make the difference between tolerable and toxic stress. So think about all the stress that's coming at someone, and if you have those supportive relationships, that can balance out, that can counterbalance the impact of toxic stress on the brain. Isn't that fascinating? And God calls us to be so relational. And then that professional case management, and that's really customized to a family and what their specific needs are. Some of our families are great budgeters, some aren't. Some need help with life skills. Some families need help with thinking about, how do I make more money? Do I need to go back to school? Is there some sort of course that I can take that help me get promoted? What are the goals that you want to set to help you get to a place of self-sufficiency? But it's because we understand how the brain functions in poverty and under that extreme stress that we provide that immediate assistance to stabilize. And then that network of support. It's hard to see here. And so Stabilizing a family, initial case management is just focused on stabilizing, creating new neural pathways, the healing impact of positive relationships. We didn't really talk about neural pathways. I think Carolyn talked about that before, so we don't have to go into that. Questions? Yeah?
If someone has grown up in poverty or lived in poverty for a long time, to what extent can their kind of trained mindsets, you know, or the neural pathways be reversed?
Yeah, that's what's so, and I'm like not a neuroscientist, but we know that there is, I feel like that's just such a testament to God's grace, is that there is hope. And that a brain is a muscle. And so neural pathways, you know, you think about walking that path and it gets deeper and deeper when you build those habits, but that's not your fate. Like, that's not your destiny. You can change habits, you can create neural pathways, you can create new patterns of operating. So I feel like that's really encouraging. You know, they really do look at, you know, you can see, as the research says, the impact of that extreme stress and poverty on a child's brain and how that can have a very long-term effect. And that's very hard for me to think about. But, you know, there is hope and there is healing. I actually left in the middle of Carolyn's presentation because she was talking about trauma and kids, and I'm like, I just can't. Ignorance is bliss. What else? This is all I got, so you go, I'm ready, bring it. Yeah.
Where do you find the families? Do they come to you?
Yeah.
Do you guys seek them out, or?
Sometimes, both. So sometimes we have church partners that say, hey, we've got a family that's come to us or is part of our church community that we think would be a good fit. Sometimes we have agencies that we partner with that reach out to us and say, we think we have a mom that's a good fit for you. I will tell you that it is really, really, really hard to become self-sufficient. And desperation does not equal motivation. And so the family that's the right fit for Bridge of Hope has to be really motivated to make those changes, because it's really hard work. It's not easy. It's not fun to put your kid in childcare for 10 hours a day. So it's not easy, and so we're definitely looking for those families that are motivated to get to a different place. And that takes some families longer than others, and it's not so much about, I'll tell you what, we've got, gosh, I can think of one mom that we have that is terrible on paper, probably the most challenging case that we have taken in, and she is like kicking butt. And so I don't so much worry about the barriers, the challenges, the obstacles, as much as I worry about that drive and motivation.
Kind of back to your little bit of comment on the trauma piece with, you know, the last talk is there this Bridge of Hope, or are there resources that you can point people to get the proper type of counseling? Because frequently, you know, you said it's not always motivating. Perhaps that lack of motivation is because they had some traumatizing experience, or their mindset is so stuck in this poverty cycle that they maybe just aren't quite where they have the capacity to take those next steps.
That is a great point.
How do you suggest, you know, say we're in contact with these people, what are the resources we send them to?
That's such a great point, and that's also, I feel, a struggle that we face a bit. So we absolutely refer families to mental health services, and that's not, I've been through years of counseling, like that's nothing that I think just people in poverty need counseling. But I think that we absolutely try to connect people with those resources. I am not a counselor. Our case manager is not a counselor, and I make that very clear. That's just not our wheelhouse. Same with substance abuse. People that are coming to our program that have had past issues with addiction, like, not an addictions counselor. You can be in our program in recovery, but you're going to have to keep this. You know, you're going to have to commit to us to continue with your recovery plan. I think that's a really good point about that lack of motivation that comes with the trauma.
Are there, like,
it's hard.
affordable or even free resources that you are connected
connected to that offer that, you know, like I've seen a counselor who charges $120 an hour. You know, somebody in poverty is not, you know.
Right. So Medicaid.
Is not going to have that resource.
So Medicaid, you can get counseling through that. And then there are places that offer counseling service on a sliding scale. But I think it is challenging to find those resources. And then, you know, I think one of the challenging things is if you're paying $120 an hour, you have a lot of freedom to say, I don't really like this counselor. I'm going to go see someone else, where there isn't as much freedom. And I think liking and trusting the counselor is really important. Yeah?
Well, and there are resources out there. There's All Health.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, they're out there. They will give you counseling for free. Well, they kind of look at what you have. They don't pay.
So the sliding scale.
And they also help me to connect with other services. But the housing is the one thing we're struggling with.
Right. Yes.
Finding a place for me is hard.
And you know, one of the things that I feel like our mothers are challenged with is if you're just an individual, maybe you can go and rent a room from someone on Craigslist, hopefully that's not crazy, and you'll pay, you know, less than having your own place. When you're a mother with kids, like young kids, no one wants to share a room with you. No one's going to give you a room or wants to share a place with you. And so that's a challenge that we find. That's why we serve single moms. We find that that's a real challenge. Mm-hmm.
So this question kind of goes back to the slide you had on a second ago. Our missional community works a lot with a lot of young men that are in homelessness right here in Littleton. And I think, I mean, all kinds of names were coming to mind as we were talking through all of these things. And one of the struggles I think we've faced is that I think our whole church is really good at being family with people. And so we welcome people in and we become like uncles or brothers or sisters to them. But I think because of this, you know, they're not in their frontal cortex, you know what I mean? It's and haven't been for so long. You may provide environments of security, but then you don't hear from them for months. Or, yeah, I guess I'm just trying to, I guess the question mostly is, what advice or encouragement would you have for people that are trying to stick with it? Because if I understand between you and Carolyn, sometimes we can tend to look at it sort of flatly, like, well, why don't they just save some money? Why don't they just, like, show up to work? Why don't they just, you know, we provided all of these things for them, why don't they just show? And it's
more complicated
very,
than
very
that.
complicated. And you want to stick with them, and you're worried about them. There's just all these emotions and different things that go on with this. So I guess, like, do you have any thoughts about what you do? You know, because it becomes almost like it's your little brother, and you want him to do well. You know, I don't know if it's making sense as a question. But
it is.
How do you encourage perseverance to not give up on people and to thereby perpetuate the same thing that there's acceptance and safety in a family. We give up on them, they just lost a place of acceptance and safety, you know.
Well, what does it look like to love someone, walk alongside them, and also know that you can't make them make the right decisions? And because we've just talked about this mental model and hidden rules and the brain, understanding that there's a lot more behind what they're doing and the decisions they're making than just do this. Do you know what I mean? Like it's more complicated with that, as you just acknowledged. And I feel really passionately, I mean, I feel really strongly about Bridge of Hope. Our case manager's always like, outcomes, and which is great. Because I feel just so strongly about walking with people that are struggling and loving them and seeing them, because we could all be that person, and that's who Christ calls us to be. You know, I think we make a mistake to think that we're not vulnerable to crisis or those circumstances, because we all are. You know, I think that you referred to kind of the safety that we create in middle class. It's really an illusion, right? So totally, we all have this illusion of safety, and we're all vulnerable to be in these circumstances where we're just trying to get by day to day. But I think, you know, to think about What does it mean to love someone when they don't make decisions that you like? To have that safe environment and allow them to engage or not engage. You know, when they're, what would Jesus do? I don't know.
Yeah, and
like
I guess
lay up at
maybe
night
from
thinking
the
about this.
neuroscience standpoint as well too, there's the idea of like creating new pathways.
Mm-hmm.
You might be deepening the rut that they're in by giving up on them too early.
I don't know.
Like, any thoughts on that?
No. I mean, these are really complicated things, and I don't know. I mean, gosh, I'm 40. Ask me when I'm 60.
Okay. I'll put it in my to-do.
Yeah, there you go. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah.
So I know that there's been a lot of talk about Initiative 300.
Yes. Oh, Lordy.
For those that don't know, it's basically allowing homeless people to live in tents in public areas. It didn't pass yesterday.
But it lost pretty spectacularly. I was
Yeah.
surprised at the margin by lost.
What are your thoughts on that push? Like, do you think it's a helpful thing or a harmful thing, or kind of like, from your perspective, what are your views on it? I know it's kind of loaded. I'm trying not.
No, it's okay. I can just share briefly that I did not vote for the passage of, I voted against the passage of 300. I don't agree with criminalizing homelessness. Homeless people are people in our society and we should see them and love them, but I do think that it prevented service agencies, I think it normalized homelessness too much. I think that it prevented certain service agencies from being able to provide services and approach people and offer those services on more than one occasion. I think that there are major public health crises that come with allowing people to set up tent cities and whatnot. And so I think we can do better. I'm not going to ask you what you think because it's after 8 and I'm going to Chicago. I have a flight at 6 a.m. But I really appreciate you all. Thanks for having me. Thanks for participating. I know we're all tired, but thanks for just being engaged. So.
I'm going to ask Rob to come and pray for us before he does. Just a quick announcement. August 28th is our next session. It is on foster care and mental health. Just as a church, at a certain point, we will have like about 3 or 4 families that are doing foster care, which is just amazing for a church our size and really encouraging. But that means we're going to be bringing in foster kids and foster families and just having a basic understanding of how to deal with that and how to empathize and understand and walk alongside people for that, that long-term, mental health growth. So looking forward to that. Megan Magel from Project 127 will be with us. So August 28th, you can go to the same website, sola.church/mental health to get information, and tickets will be on sale pretty soon. Okay.
Oh, I forgot to.
Yes.
Never mind. I had sign-up sheets for more information.
Oh.
I forgot.
Do you want to set it here?
Sure.
If you want more information about Bridge of Hope, there's a
newsletter.
sign-up sheet. Be on the newsletter and get updates from them. So I will. Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. And so I'll turn it over to Rob.
Let's pray together. God, we are grateful that you are wise and good and kind. We believe your story, that you created all things good, and we love so much the truth that we read in Colossians of how Jesus oversees the universe by the word of his power, that you have made each of us in fearful and wonderful ways, that you know our innermost thoughts and the way we were knit in our mother's wombs. You oversee every atom and even the things beneath the atoms. They're all underneath your authority and control, and yet somehow in the fall and in rebellion, there has been a corruption that's spread throughout all of your creation. And so we cling to the good news that Jesus, you restore everything. And in between the time when we live and when you restore, we look for your Spirit's wisdom for how to deal with these things. We are looking into brokenness, and we have people on our minds. We ourselves have experienced this sort of brokenness. And we thank you for the ongoing common grace and goodness of scientific discovery, that has helped us to understand these things more. Help us to take these pieces of information, these observations about behaviors, and the science that is backing all of this, and learn how to use it appropriately so that we may better reach into these broken communities and relationships and people and show them the kind of restoration that you cause and bring about. And let us remember that you are the one that does this, that your Spirit is the one who breathes life and makes what was dead alive again. And let us remember that, Jesus, you're the Savior. And let us enter into these relationships unreservedly, fully facing them, knowing that you have called us to this place and that you carry us through everything you call us to. We pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen.